Today I have been talking again about the responsibility of each of the nations. I have been actually, now today it was written text. I have been summarizing today that in substance it all sums to a responsibility of each of the nations to update the cultural value systems. It has been underlined that religions that are 2 millenniums old are to quite an extent basically based on recruiting certain cultural identities, certain identities into larger groups, and ultimately have become, for a very long period of time, it is well known history, the source of various racial wars, the fiercest racial wars actually on the planet have been happened under a religious flag. Let's be reminded that religions have actually ignited that kind of antagonism based on first step recruiting people in larger group that is happening or based on certain kind of diversity and certain kind of antagonism ultimately versus other groups. No, to such an extent, it is political. There is political dimension embodied with it. There is a racial dimension embodied with it, and it becomes today one of the drivers for ongoing recruiting of people in different groups. To quite an extent, I would say brainwashing them equally, and even rather enslaving them within certain political groups. Gradually, today, very much using the financial systems or systems of group profit-making, investment policies, and things like that, where people become drawn into over predatory financial schemes and become basically victimized and become easily vulnerable then to compromise further their positions and gradually become involved in some kind of basically political, ultimately religious or political game field where people become blackmailed for purpose of further increased political antagonism or racial antagonism, and basically used to conduct racial or political conflicts. Basically, we talk about here the religions and financial systems become ways of recruiting or enslaving people, technically, within certain high-stake political racial antagonism. That is what's going to make today religions obsolete, where we need to go next level, question what's behind it, and on what ground people find themselves antagonized on various political territories. How far today we can accept in modern living people to continue to be antagonized by religious polarizations. Or we will be directly talking about cultural alliances rather. Today I have to notice that we find ourselves on crossroad from trying to get out from the religious polarizations and bring ourselves closer aligned to some kind of racial historic DNA alignment. But very often I'm going to notice people continue to be unaware that they jump within still very present religious game field, where easily such a religious game field can be ignored and become easy victims to much more complex political game field, which basically religion becomes ultimately political game field, racial game field, and people that start a certain journey out of some kind of cultural alignment, DNA level alignment, my kind of people alignment, may easily get walking too close to religious and to sharper religious and sharper, much more extreme religious and much more extreme political agendas and end up being used by such agendas. Here, what starts from some kind of naive level of cultural alliance becomes recruited within some radical religious or sharp political antagonisms. We have to be very careful, therefore, first of all, not to allow our gentle kids that are absolutely unaware of how sharp the real world can be to become victims to such worlds, while our kids become, on the other side, over-relaxed by global culture, by this kind of democratic approach that Western societies continue to sell as some kind of cultural illusion, while without informing enough their own citizens how heavily this kind of over-relaxed cultural approach and democratic approach that they are offering on their Western territories, how closely it can walk with ultra-right religious and political groups that would have very serious agendas on their grounds, in their notebooks, and would certainly would need young and naive recruitees for their extreme racial or political agendas. That is where I'm going to find today Western society very vulnerable, and democracy of Western society very vulnerable, and losing assurance to us as parents they can be protective to our kids as immigrants that they continue to invite on their territories. We as parents become highly concerned about what's going on the streets of Western societies can endanger either the companies in which they work, the capital by which they are recruited, and further on affecting their social network, and affecting further what kind of groups are going to be walking in their proximity. West becomes with their extreme democracy, West has become a very dangerous place to be at the moment. Western societies, I would argue, have reached the level where democracy started to work against them, and that they continue to feel suffocated by their own political choices. In that respect, I'm going to say, it is one thing when I promote here my rosy picture of planet Earth, of garden of various cultures and various nations. And then what happens when one zoom all of that? In that context, I will remind again that my work I have recognized as matter of level of Council and Office of United Nations. I have not taken here some specific national or religious position. Also in that context, I will say I am of Orthodox. My family is Orthodox family. That's our religion. I don't know much about Muslim religion, and I would feel very uncomfortable if I need to get close, me or my kids or my family, too close to Muslim religion. I'm also aware that these people are very prone to various agendas, various extreme right groups, and I would certainly find that very dangerous for myself on personal level, or my kids or my family in general, and would rather be much more comfortable to remain within my Orthodox environment if it comes to that level of personal security. There is nothing to do with being humanitarian and promoting various cultures. I mean, supporting various cultures, but I am not willing and I cannot afford to get too close to such groups, and I'm going to ask them to also be restrained from getting too close to me. I have provided enough assistance as a counselor of United Nations, and that should be appreciated and understood and respected accordingly. I do not walk my orthodoxy as aggressiveness or as a subordinate segregation to any other race, but I certainly would walk it as some kind of protection, as some kind of bodyguard versus religions that I'm not comfortable too much with. Being said that, I would have second shield protectionism against any kind of religion, including Orthodox, which I have found equally in breach of personal freedom, personal rights, especially when it comes to closely related, family-related presences of identity rather than religious diversity. I have been talking today about that close family-related diversity where certain nations continue to promote very, very narrow defined identity and are denying their own, therefore, history and their own, especially if that would have been imperial history, that would require a bit broader range of identities in order to provide certain qualitative benchmark that would be necessary for playing empire. You cannot play empire as a Cinderella or as some kind of I don't know, competition of Miss Universe or competition for a Eurovision contest. Let's be very clear here. Such defined national identity is not going to serve any nation, for any other purpose, but exactly participating in such kind of contests, either Eurovision or Miss Universe, or getting role in Hollywood. But if someone wants to play their imperial history, then let's agree one would need a bit broader defined national identity. That being said, in that context, I'm going to find the religion driving more. I have impression that religion would end up driving narrower than what would be suggested by imperial or national heritage, which, by the way, define currency of a nation rather than religion. Religion do not define currency of a nation, but their national and imperial history. So each of the nations should be aware exactly what range of identities, not religions, but identities, would fall in their national library as matter of historic heritage, which would indicate, therefore, which would be information for a nation, what it takes to get that kind of currency, to get kind of qualitative national dimension, and to play much more stronger international role on international field. So the question, therefore, national identity versus religious dogmatism and religious restriction, I'm going to find reflected in the story of Mary and Jesus, which have become stories of racial restriction, I would rather say, rather than of racial inclusiveness. And would today pose to Orthodox to any of religions that question how far religions incorporate racial diversity on their territories? How far, nations, religions tolerate, and how far nations therefore ultimately end up tolerating racial diversity in some kind of range of what would be variation to their national identity. Because we have here something getting a bit too much scrutinized when it comes to what is national identity and what's not national identity. And people get on the edge, and then people get sacrificed and hunted like they're some kind of animals. That is because it is being created gap between the religions and between the national identities. And certain people are being left in between, within the X-breed, not being taken care of, not being provided for enough. That is where religious artifacts are building their predatory hunting psychology, and that is why I'm going to find today religions obsolete. Altogether, religions are obsolete. That is why I'm not willing at all to recognize any kind of religious movement behind my cultural, my work that is certainly driving on some kind of humanitarian protocol. On level of cultural recognition. But certainly today we have moved in these two millenniums of time, we have moved from that kind of rather naked national identity and cultural identity to much more complex political and financial and religious games. And our kids, if they're going to listen to my work, would be naively idealistic about that cultural diversity. And that is why today I have to insist on such shield that would be dictated by your national definition, even a religious definition to a certain extent, just to somehow prevent overstepping and allowing various agendas and various interests to find their field where humanitarian approaches are working and where the intention of this kind of work would be to assist United Nations in the best possible way of coaching nations towards their future, much more relaxed international relationships. But I'm going to say something else here. I have come here with my kids, left behind the old life, the old country, everything that was part of it, under promise of better life here. And better life did not happen neither for me, neither, I'm going to say, comfortably for my kids as well. Western promise doesn't work. And it's time that all of the immigrants that are coming here on some kind of promises are to be informed. Westlands are not a promise. They're just a bigger black hole where nothing gets solved, but rather continue to escalate and escalate and escalate because Westlands do not have capacity to solve any of the problems. So their promises for better life on their territories are simply fake. That is today that we need to seal and all agree upon. Westlands promises for better life are fake. We are not secure here. We don't feel safe here. No, we can't see future for our kids here. And on top of that, we are wasting enormous amount of money to stay here. Our families are wasting enormous amount of money to keep us safe. And all together is one big black hole to all of the immigrants that hope for better future here. That is where Westland today is. Not promise for better or safer life. Their democracy doesn't work for anyone, including for immigrants. They invite immigrants that come properly on their territory, on proper promise, lured here for promise of better life. They're luring the best of our territories, the best of our territories to come here. For what exactly? For being basically treated in rather some kind of predatory sentiment of their entire civilizational setting. People here basically become exposed to very predatory cultural setting that will need to be concluded here. And that Western propaganda, you go on Western, you paid better, you get paid better. It is in substance too much rosy for what you actually, where you actually get yourself here, unprepared in most of the cases, neither you or your kids. So for overcrowded Western democratic society, which become a nest for various terrorist groups, terrorist organizations, various radical movements. West collects all of that. West does not restrict any of it. All that West is interested is just money, money, money. Most of us, especially the one that comes from Orthodox territories, are very much accommodated to much more safe environment, much more in-housed environment, a much more in-gardened environment, and our people are literally totally unprepared for living in this kind of open ground of the of social presence and social networks where kids equally unprepared for such kind of interface end up to be very easy target to various radical groups. Western societies continue to be very easy target to various radical movements. I'm going to say 1,000 times that Western societies are not safe ground for our kids and for our future generations. That will need to be concluded today. Because the West does not have capacity neither to recognize the issues, neither to properly address them, neither to properly solve them. Well, that is not what you sell as a highest promise in any touristic agency for immigrants. Yes, touristic agency for immigrants, exactly. That is not exactly what you sell under highest price. I am sick of feeling threatened here. I'm feeling unsafe. I am sick of feeling unemployed here. I am sick of not being recognized and rewarded for what I do. And as I go home, what I want to say to you today, as I go home, I bring institutions with me. As I return home, I bring the institutions with me, and I'm going to leave you on what you are and always have been, just a land on which some people have been crawling in the eternity of times.